the scariest stories you can tell a child. If you think about it, you're telling a kid a story about some children whose parents decided to abandon them in the forest and let them starve to death. Not exactly an uplifting a tale there for a little kid. But it was interesting. I did a little research on this story, and actually based on a time of history in Europe in the early 14th century, there was a great famine. It was called the Great Famine of 1315 through 1317. And this was a really bad time in European history. The rain just wouldn't stop. The crops did not grow. It was a very, very bad time to be alive. And the famine was so bad, people were starving. They would do things like this. They would lead their kids off into the forest and let them basically die because they couldn't feed them. There are even many instances reported of cannibalism. So it's just really, I thought it was really interesting to hear that, some of these folk tales came from very tragic and unfortunate time in history. Let's go back to the story. Once upon a time, and I kind of just told you about what time that was, there was a young boy named Hansel and a young girl named Gretel. These two kids lived with their parents. Their father was a very poor woodcutter, and they lived with their stepmother, which is not their birth mother. And again, there was an extreme, according to the story, a dearth on the land at the time. And a dearth is another word for a famine. So this family was very poor. They had a very hard time making ends meet. Stepmother goes to the woodcutter and says, "Darling, we do not have enough food to feed us and the children. We're going to have to get rid of the kids. I want you tomorrow to take them out to the forest. Lead them off far away enough that they can't find their way back. And just let them go." Woodcutter, not very happy with that idea, but decides he's going to have to do what his wife tells him. So the next day, he sets out with the two kids to the forest. But Hansel had a little bit of an inclination of what was going on. So he loaded his pockets with some white pebbles. And all along the path out to the forest, he was dropping those pebbles, creating a trail for himself. So when he got to the spot where the father vanished, they were able, once the sun had set and the moon rose in the sky, they could see those white pebbles on the forest floor, and they were able to trace them back to the house. We're much to the surprise of the stepmother. We're back! And she feigned surprise. She said, where have you been? I was worried about you. So they were there for the next couple days. But then it got to the point where the woodcutter and his wife were down to their last half of a loaf of bread. The stepmother said to the woodcutter, "This is it. This is all the food we have. You have to take the kids back out to the forest, even farther, and make sure they get lost. We cannot feed them anymore." So the woodcutter, again feeling bad about what had agreed to do the last time, begrudgingly decides to go ahead and do it again. So the next day, they give Hansel and Gretel each a slice of bread, and they head out into the forest. Well, this time, Hansel says, I think I know what's going on this time. I'm going to make another trail. And instead of the little stones, he uses breadcrumbs. He makes a trail of breadcrumbs out to that spot where his father left him. Father vanishes, the sun sets, the moon comes up. Okay, let's follow our trail back to the house. They discover the breadcrumbs have disappeared. The birds of the forest ate them. And now they were completely lost. They had no choice but to wander aimlessly through the forest. And they actually wandered for 3 days until they came upon a small cottage. And upon closer inspection, the small cottage was made out of food. It was made out of candy and cakes. The hungry children were very ravenous, so they just dropped everything and decided to start eating this house. The house roof was made of cakes. The windows were made out of clear sugar. Hansel went for the roof. Gretel went for the window. They ate and ate. Beyond the point of where they were full. They just kept eating until they could no longer eat. Once they were done, the owner of the house opens the door and invites them in. And when they get in the house, they find that there was a meal waiting for them. A meal of pancakes,
Ooh.
sugar, nuts, apples, milk. They eat again. So Hansel and Gretel are very full and they're very tired. They decided to turn in for the night to sleep. Well, unbeknownst to Hansel and Gretel, the owner of the house was a witch. She was a cannibal. She had other plans for these two. She decided that she was going to eat young Hansel. So the next morning, she wakes up Hansel first, takes him into a cage and locks him in that cage. Then she wakes up Gretel and says, you know what? From now on, you're going to be my servant and you're going to feed your brother. And we're going to fatten him up until he gets to the point where I can eat him. So that's what she does. She has no choice. She's now the house servant. She makes the meals 3 times a day for her brother, feeds him, fatten him up. Every morning, the witch would go to the cage and say, Hansel, stick your finger out. I want to feel how plump you've become. Her eyesight was not very good. So Hansel actually had a bone on the floor of his cage that he was able to pull out and hold out instead of his finger. The witch would touch it and go, this kid is still skin and bones. Keep feeding him. We got to get him. This happened for 4 weeks. Every day he would trick her with a bone. But it got to the point where the witch was just so famished. She said, I have to eat today. I can't do it anymore. Whether he's skinny or fat, today's the day we're going to cook Hansel and eat him. Gretel, prepare the oven. Light the fire. We need to bake the bread. Prepare for my feast. So Gretel gets the oven started. She lights the fire. And then the witch says, Gretel, I need you to stick your head in the oven and make sure that it's hot enough for us to bake the bread. So Gretel thinks, my gosh, she's probably going to put me in the oven and have me as the appetizer. She feigns ignorance and says, I don't know how to do that. Could you please show me how to check the oven? She says, silly child, I'll show you. So the witch sticks her head in the oven to test the fire. But Gretel gains the upper hand, pushes her into the oven, shuts the door, and locks the bolt. The witch is soon baked to death in her own oven. And she's able to break her brother out of his cage and free him. And on their way out of the house, they find a vase full of treasure and jewels. They go back home with their newfound treasure, and they discover that their stepmother is now dead. Well, maybe a connection? But they live happily ever after with their father and their newfound treasure. They never starve again. The moral of the story is the evil of gluttony. You should never take more than you need. Just only survive on what you get. And I know it's kind of a screwed up ending because you end up getting treasure and living happily ever after. But anyways, that is the story of Hansel and Gretel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Thank you. Very well done. Appreciate that.